Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of This Academic Life. It is Friday, November 1st. So usually I start my videos by apologizing for not having made one for a while, and I'm not going to do that today because it's related to the topic of the video, which is perfectionism. Now, when I started this channel 2 years ago, I had a big idea in my head of what it was going to be like. I wanted to do videos at least 2 times a month. I wanted to be really consistent. I had a whole list of ideas for videos that I wanted to record, and it actually hasn't panned out. And for me, one of the biggest frustrations I have is when something that I plan doesn't go perfectly. Now, perfectionism is something that I think that many people in academia can identify with. And perfectionism comes with a whole host of other issues, like self-esteem issues. It comes with behavioral issues like procrastination and so on. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about my experiences with perfectionism and its associated issues, and some of the things that I've learned. Now, these things might not apply to everyone's experiences, obviously, but I thought that it might be rather insightful. So, I've identified or struggled with perfectionism as long as I can remember. As a child, I got very frustrated if the story that I was writing or the picture that I was drawing wasn't quite perfect. I've always been the type of person who will start something, and if it doesn't look great, I'll crumple it up instead of working with what I have and working to improve that. For the longest time, I didn't write drafts of anything. I worked on it in my head until it felt just right, and then I could put it on the page. Now, when I was growing up until I reached graduate school, perfectionism was very adaptive and it worked well for me. So, because I also didn't really struggle academically, perfectionism seemed like something that was working perfectly fine. So I would, wait till the night before to write a paper and write it and get a good mark on it. So I assumed that my perfectionism was working well for me. And indeed, perfectionism can be very adaptive in many ways. It can, I think, help people to be very meticulous in their work, so they will be very mindful about small details, about structure, about content, about research. So perfectionism is obviously in some ways something that is beneficial, or what we call ego-syntonic. So it's something that benefits us and that helps us. Obviously, getting into post-secondary education, and especially into graduate school, into a master's, a PhD, and going on to be a faculty member, perfectionism, obviously, if it makes us more productive, if it makes us pay attention to detail, can work. However, what I've learned and what I've been more willing to admit is that perfectionism in many ways in my life was not helping me out. So it was ego dystonic. It was making me feel very bad about myself, and it was causing me a lot of stress and a lot of mental and emotional discomfort. So the first time that I failed an assignment was a horrendous experience. I was in grade 3. I got 0 out of 30 on a math test. I remember exactly what I was wearing, and I ran out of the room crying. I had never failed anything in my life up until that point, and it was a huge learning experience for me. The thing is that as a child, I didn't realize that my failures or my lack of perfectionism was sometimes just related to my age and related to experience. So when I failed at a math test, it wasn't because I was a bad person. It was because I needed to learn more in that particular area. And even now, when I struggle to write a paper that seems perfect to me, I realize that I'm only in the 4th year of my PhD, and I'm trying to emulate people who have been working in the field for 20, 30, 40 years. That is simply a huge leap, and I need to admit and acknowledge that it's not that I have shortcomings, it's that I have a lack of experience, and I need to hone my skills more, and that is not something that I need to feel bad about. And really, if we want to see our careers in academic life or in whatever kind of profession, especially if it's creative professions as well, that, we can't have it all worked out when we're 22 and then we're going to be a professor and produce perfect papers. It doesn't work like that. And there's two reasons why perfectionism in the lifetime of a career is actually not a great thing. Not a super great thing. One is that with experience and with time, you gain more knowledge. And what you knew at 22 is different than when you knew at 30 and 40 and so on. So we need to acknowledge, even as perfectionists, that there is a learning curve. And sometimes that simply takes time. The other thing, and this is what I have really, really learned to come to value, is that if I were ever to write something that was as perfect as I wanted to be, it would never provoke discussion or invite criticism. So it would never be something that was truly inviting dialogue, something that was causing people to think and to debate me, and that it's okay for people to take issue with my points or to challenge them or to agree with them. But perfectionism is this unsustainable thing that just won't work when we want to have a fruitful form of dialogue. When we look at some of the theorists in our fields, for me, I work in the humanities, so obviously it's a little bit easier to have works that are a bit more contentious than, say, a scientific theorem in many ways. But those works are still being debated. They're still being torn apart. People are still disagreeing with them years later, and these are people in my field who are considered like the top of the top. So that's been a learning experience. Learning to take criticism has been very difficult, but I've learned to take criticism, especially from my committee, as it's a gift to me. It's a gift to help make my work better, and they wouldn't be giving it to me if they didn't think that I could rise to the challenge and improve my work, and that there's nothing wrong with needing to improve my work or to make it deeper. Whatever the phrase that you want to do. Usually I don't say make my work better, but to make it more complex or to help the work go deeper. So, and these are people whose opinions I really respect, so their criticism is very valuable to me, and it doesn't mean that they don't think that my work is good. It just means that, nobody's work is perfect. So, in terms of the behaviors I think that are associated with perfectionism, procrastination is probably my biggest one. Case in point, I have to give a talk tomorrow in less than 24 hours, and I still don't have my conclusion. So, perfectionism and procrastination go hand in hand because when you've got an idea in your head and you can't quite make it come out on the end of a pen or in your Word document, sometimes you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait because you keep thinking that if you just give it a bit more time, it'll work out. It'll work out. And you keep waiting and you keep waiting and you can't start because it won't be perfect and it won't be perfect. And then eventually you get to the night before a paper is due and you end up frantically writing it. And often, instead of that being comforting, you feel even more just wrought with anxiety because now you didn't give yourself the time to even make it perfect, and it becomes a bit of a vicious circle. So I definitely understand the issues with procrastination. One of the things that's weirdly happened now is that I have started to use procrastination as a way to kind of do the end run around perfectionism. So if I leave something to the last minute, I don't have to worry about it being perfect because who could expect it to be perfect if you only write it in a day or a weekend? So that starts to combat the perfectionism, but it's, again, not a perfect model. When I decided, and in many ways was forced to give up perfectionism, I realized that because I'd used perfectionism for so long and because it had been so adaptive for me, I had never learned some of the skills that I really needed to learn. Time management, I had never really had to learn. I never really had to learn making drafts and going through various iterations of a project. I hadn't had to learn those things because for a while perfectionism was working, and there came a point where it no longer worked, and it doesn't really work anymore, even though I struggle. The last point that I wanted to make was about the social implications of perfectionism. So I think in graduate school, especially in higher education, we often perceive other people as doing better than we are, as being more successful, and so on. And I think that can be really hard to deal with, always thinking that the bar is being raised so much higher by everyone else and you have to meet it. What's been helpful for me is to actually speak with my colleagues and to understand that they're going through the exact same things as I am. We have doubts about our work. We have doubts about our progress. But knowing that, not everyone is producing publishable works on the first try, it can be very comforting. But I also have to say that perfectionism at a certain point became damaging in my relationships because it meant that I was horrible at taking compliments. It meant that I was the type of kid who, I got 95% on a test and I would cry and I would be so mad and so disappointed and had no real sense, obviously I was a child then, but no real sense that my anger with myself about not being perfect might have an impact on the person who is happy because they finally got a B+. It took me a while to realize that my internal standards were not universal standards that applied to everyone, and that I needed to recognize that and realize that. Because I think perfectionism, in some ways for me, at different times with regards to different tasks, made me a bit judgmental, and I can fully admit that. Obviously that's not something that I struggle with at the moment. But I can definitely say that as a child, especially because I didn't realize it wasn't universal, it made me frustrated at times with other people. Another thing that's happened is I think that there's a certain point where perfectionism becomes really frustrating in relationships when you can't tell somebody that they need to just... I'm trying to think of how to put this into words, but I think that many of us have had the experience, whether it's frustration with ourselves or frustration with others, when people keep working, they're staying up till 6 in the morning to try and make something perfect, and you want to tell them that it'll be okay, it doesn't need to be perfect, and yet they constantly won't listen to that. So I know that I've definitely had to work on those things, because I saw how irritated some people were getting. And again, I think it's a work in progress. The work will get done, and if it doesn't get done, that's okay sometimes, and if it doesn't get done in the way that we want to, that's okay as well. But I think having a bit more compassion with ourselves and with others makes it that much easier. I was watching a Star Trek episode, Star Trek Voyager, and they find this omega particle, and for the Borg, that's considered perfection. So this one particle. But it's very, very unstable, it's very, very dangerous, and it only stays in this particular perfect formation for a limited amount of time. So for me, that episode really reminded me that there might be one moment where you feel like you've accomplished something perfectly, and then you might need to move on, and then there might be another step. So at this point in time, I still fully admit that I struggle with perfectionism at different times. It's certainly a lot better than it used to be. I'm much more easygoing than I used to be, and it's allowed me to breathe a little bit more and to enjoy my work a little bit more. Am I going to say that I'm no longer a perfectionist? No, I would say that it's something that's part of my past and a part of my present, and I need to work through it. So I'm really interested to hear other people's experiences of perfectionism, how it made you feel, how it impacted your relationships with others, how it impacted your work, what's helped, because this is something that I'm looking to figure out more and more. So I'm hoping that this video finds you well, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye.